Hello and welcome to the One Life Church devotional series. Today we're on chapter 45 of Genesis and Acts chapter 17. If you're with us for the very first time and you read 2 chapters a day with us, for the next 20 months you will cover the entire Bible. Now, our setting today is literally the armpit of our property. In fact, if my wife knew that I had brought us here, she would be a little bit concerned, because you see this ugly fence around here. She asked me to put this up to hide all our junk. And I suppose every house has got this, where you put things away that you're going to deal with some other time. But unfortunately, it gets into disrepair very, very quickly. And I think sometimes when I look at our lives look a little like this rubbish yard, don't they? We make bad decisions. We wind up doing stupid things, and our lives become this eclectic collection of tragedies and mishaps, smattered with some beautiful things. If you had to really look through here, there's some treasure. My wife wouldn't believe it, but there's treasure behind it. Now, the life of Joseph must have appeared a little bit like this at one stage, sitting in jail, sold into slavery, miles away from his mom and dad. And yet this is what he says to his brothers when he reveals his identity to his brothers. He says to them, I'm Joseph. They're horrified. They fall down before him. But verse 7 says, "But God sent me ahead of you to preserve for you a remnant on earth and to save your lives by a great deliverance." It's a very curious comment. He says, God sent me ahead of you. Now, some of you are going to say, well, I don't understand that. Are you saying that God put the murderous intent in his brothers' hearts? Are you saying God caused his brothers to sin so that he could wind up in Egypt and save them? Now, quite clearly, the Bible doesn't teach that. The Bible does not teach that God causes people to sin. He doesn't sin through people vicariously. God is holy. He doesn't do that. In addition to that, the Bible says God doesn't even tempt anybody. In James, he doesn't tempt anybody. So how can Joseph say, God sent me ahead of you? Well, this is what he's saying, is that in the mess of our lives, it's like God walks into the scrapyard of our lives. He says, okay, this is what you boys have done. This is what you've done. You're in Egypt, you're in prison. Okay, I'm going to use this for my glory and for your good, for the good of my people. And that's what we read about in Romans 8 the other day, wasn't it? That he works together, all things together for the good, for those who love him and are called according to his purposes. And so Joseph is able to say to his brothers, I never mind about your belongings, because the best of all Egypt will be yours now. He's basically saying, don't worry about your stuff. Yeah, in fact, God says to you, if you seek first the kingdom and his righteousness, all these things will be added unto you. So Joseph was a God-fearing man, and he said, listen, don't worry about that. He gave them carts, which is like in today's version, cars, I suppose, and clothes. And so what we see in this story is God walking through the scrapyard of our lives, saying, I am going to take that gold. Now, there's some pretty cool stuff in here. In fact, there's a canoe or two, which I really like. And God steps through all the rubbish, and he turns something beautiful out of the junk of our lives. Now, in Acts chapter 17, Paul does a similar thing. He winds up in a place called Athens, and he's wandering through a set of idolatrous altars, and he's looking intently at them. And the next day he's talking to the locals in the area, and this is what he says to them. He says to them, I notice that you are spiritual, like I am spiritual. And I noticed that as I was looking intently at your gods, that you've got one ascribed to an unknown God. And so Paul says, well, let me tell you about that God. And he brings the gospel to him. And so what Paul does, he steps through the altars and the idolatry, and he says, okay, now let me take something and bring some gold. Let me take something and bring the gospel there. Paul, just like God stepping through the junkyards of our lives, steps through the junkyards of Athens and says, let me tell you about this altar, an unknown God. I'll tell you about who that unknown God really is. And so I think what we've seen today is that God has a way of turning junk into beauty, taking ashes and making them beautiful. God bless you. Have a great day.